Good morning. This is John Cogan. I am the CEO of Performative, the online community for corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related professionals. I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled Interview Skills. So congratulations, you've landed an interview. Now let's make the most of it. This webinar will cover the following topics: interview performance, employed candidate versus in-transition candidate, roadmap to the hiring manager, which covers pre-interview networking, knowing what questions you'll be asked, and determining what your questions will be. So we've got a lot of ground to cover today. We do have on today's event. First off, a link to today's presentation and a video of the recording of this webinar will be sent out to all attendees within 24 hours. That is a link to the Prezo and a link to the recording. We won't send the whole recording. And this presentation is actually already posted at performative.com/resources for a free download. So if you want to follow along, make notes, etc., feel free to hop out there and grab that right now. But if you don't want to grab it now, we'll send you a link to make it easy. We are offering CPE credits today, and those who would like CPE credits will need to answer all 3 of the polling questions during today's event. And hopefully you have pre-registered for CPE credit. If you did not, no worries. Just drop a line to Chris Brower. You can see her email address right there. Please ask questions. Today we do have a Q&A segment at the end of today's webinar. So first we will start by listening to a presentation from our wonderful speaker, who I shall introduce shortly, and then we will go into a Q&A portion of the event. So ask questions at any time. If you take a quick look at the GoToWebinar control panel, you will see that there's a little questions area there. Finally, when we're done, you will be asked to take a short survey regarding today's webinar. We always want to do better the next time. And if you give us just 60 seconds after today's webinar, that would be great. Let us know what you thought, what we can improve on. We always want to do better. Plus, if you'd like to be directly connected with today's speaker, Mark Richards, his name is on that survey. You can just click a button, and we will be very happy to see you, to connect you directly with Mark. Okay, learning objectives. So after participating in today's event, we hope you'll be much better prepared for any upcoming interviews that you've got, how to prepare for them, what to do during the interviews, and understanding how to make the most of these precious chances that we have at positions. A quick welcome to Performative. Performative is the largest and fastest growing online community and resource for senior corporate finance, treasury, accounting, and related professionals. It's a wonderful free resource. It's completely free and noise-free, no selling, no self-promotion, no ads, just CFOs, controllers, treasurers, and the like helping one another out. And it's a great peer-based resource. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce today's speaker. Joining us this morning is Mark Richards, who's a finance executive and creator of Candidates Chair. Mark is currently helping SuccessFactors integrate a company they recently purchased in Minnesota, where Mark was the consulting CFO. Mark started off in public accounting 25 years ago and has been in corporate finance roles for the past 20 years. His roles have included being CFO of 6 startup companies, an SVP for Royal Bank of Canada in their U.S. Wealth Management Division, and a Director of International Finance for Carlson Companies. Mark developed CandidatesChair.com after a job transition and has been chair of a local finance executive group in Minnesota for 5 years. The site has drawn visitors from over 90 countries, and over 25,000 copies of his job search tools have been downloaded from his site. Mark also has 2 of the most read blog posts ever on Performative. So Mark, thanks so much for joining us here, and why don't I let you take it away.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. And as John said, for me, I started my work started my Candidates Chair after I had my own job transition. So everything that you see here is really based upon my experiences and then the experiences of fellow colleagues that I've met through job transition and in my running the local networking chapter in Minnesota I've probably met with I don't know, a couple hundred finance executives. So a lot of this is not just my own experience, but kind of a collective view. And so that's the way candidates share it as well, just a collective view of all the things that I've learned and just put it in one place. And it's really from the perspective of someone that's looking for the job, not so much from from a recruiter or HR person, but kind of what we face day to day looking for work. And again, as I'm a fellow finance executive, and also been working with John as an advisor for Performative for the last several years, and I've enjoyed it immensely. So we have a series also up there today, so on Performative, you'll see that there's other job search series that we've done, that John and I have done together. And so a lot of that relates to helping you set your expectations for search and different type of networking that you can do to help you land that job. And as John talked about today, these are very specific tactics to improve your interview skills. So when I talk about my outline today, the first thing we talk about is your expectations. And when I talk about where you need to be, I'm really talking about being in control. All of us have either interviewed or done interviewing before, and what you'll often find is that people are picking up your resume as you're walking into their office. And so to me, that's just, after seeing that several times, I realized that I had a lot more control of it if I was prepared. And I don't mean control in a bad way, like I'm trying to do something unethical. It just allowed me to make sure that I was able to take control and deliver everything that I needed to deliver in that interview. So we'll start there with the expectations, and then we'll move on to, which I think is part of your prep work, is matching your skills to the job, which is really kind of understanding yourself, the business, and then really getting down to what's critical in the role. From there, we'll go into talking about the preparation with your network, using your network to help fill in any of the gaps you've got, find out who you're interviewing, and then, if possible, start to spread your message inside the company before you even get there. Then we'll go into what I think is the heart of the interviewing process, which is the questions. And these are both questions that you'll ask and questions that you'll answer. And this, to me, is probably where, if you can invest time in this, this is where you'll really stand out from other candidates. Talk about just interviewing strategies once you actually get in there. And then lastly, just coming up with a strong finish for yourself. And I make this correlation between dating and job search, which we can talk about, we'll get to. And then, always there's something that always doesn't go right, and what's the best approach if something doesn't go well in your interview, how to fix that. All right? So let's start with, I think of interviewing like people that are Googling a question. So, I say people don't Google answers, they Google questions. And so if you take an interview from a hiring manager's perspective, the first thing that they look at from a candidate is, can he or she help me succeed? And I don't say this in a narcissistic way, but the reality is they're looking to add somebody on their team to make them successful, because as they always say that job, make your boss look successful to help yourself. That, they're looking for someone that, to take a stress off them or handle some issue that they've got in the company. So the first thing they're always looking at is, can this person help me succeed? And then they look to, do you have the skills that I don't have time to teach you? So what are the skills that they want right off the bat? They're going to be looking for very specific things, because usually there is some sort of issue that needs to get, managed right off the bat. And so, they're trying to think about, what are the skills that are absolutely critical to me? And then lastly, they always, when I look at people, they say, I'm looking for, let's say, a finance person that has a lot of experience with the sales team. So they're looking for, that's the type of things that people are talking about. I'm looking for somebody that has, a specific type of experience. They're not they don't look for, I want someone with 3 to 5 years and a degree in public accounting. That's not what they want. It's that I want someone that knows how to work with the sales team. And then, lastly, they just think about whether or not he or she will fit around here. So they're trying to get a sense of your cultural fit. So as they're looking, that's the questions that they have. What you want to offer in return is start with what's your promise? And when I look at that's really the first message you want to give. And the promise really is, what's the promise of what you bring to that company? So for example, if you were to say, in addition to all my, typical finance work, I have, worked with over 100 clients doing pricing, client calls, et cetera. So I'm a great liaison between sales and finance. So if that's what the hiring managers are looking for, that's the promise that you bring. Sure, you've got lots of other finance experience, but you want to bring that promise to match up as best you can with what the hiring manager is looking for. And underneath your promise, that's where you start to talk about what your skills are that basically support it. And then lastly, what were the experiences that developed those skills? And so those all, your skills and your experiences support that promise. And then lastly, as you share, you talk about kind of what your personality is and your management style or your work style, and then what kind of, where have you worked? Have you worked in a family-owned business? Because that's different than a publicly owned or a, it's a very small company or a large company, whatever it is. Those are the things that you'll share. So if you start here, the things that the hiring manager is looking for, it really provides a good background for where we're going to go and where you should be studying when you think about how you want to approach an interview. So for expectations, I always say you really own the interview. I mean, you're as much there to interview them as they are to interview you. And the reason that you, quite frankly, own the interview is because you have the benefit of time to prepare. I mean, you usually have time to spend time looking at this company, figuring out how to prepare. And again, I think the more time you prepare, the more control that you have. And what you want to make sure that you achieve, you're clear on your promise, and that you ultimately distinguish yourself between the other candidates. I always say it's not the best candidate that gets the job. It's usually the candidate that can best distinguish themselves, because chances are the people that they pick to interview are going to have relatively similar backgrounds on paper, but what you want to show is that you've had that, again, that unique set of skills and experiences that go hand in hand that are different than someone else and stand out from what, or try to make yourself stand out. And then for the other thing you want when you go into each interview is you want to define what the outcome is you want for each person that's interviewing you. When you think about it, each person has a different role in the company, so therefore they're going to be looking to you. So for example, when you do that first screening, someone in HR is not going to be really studying your technical skills other than perhaps, checking off the box as to what specific things that the hiring manager is looking for. Their role really is to make sure, quite frankly, that you'll fit, that you have the basic experience, but more importantly that, culturally you've got the background. So when you think about that HR person, you want to understand they're really going to probe your cultural side, so make sure you're ready for that. And then when you get into, say, someone, if you're going into a position and you're going to interview with someone that reports to the hiring manager, most likely that their role is to figure out kind of what your technical skills are going to be. So again, think about what that person's probably role is going to be as they interview you. And so again, your job isn't necessarily to convince each person you're a perfect fit for everything in a role. That's really the job for the hiring manager that you want to focus on. So again, it might be a little different outcome for each person, because ultimately each of them, the hiring manager and everyone, get together and provide their input on you. So again, try and think about what their role is going to be when they interview you and what they're going to be giving their opinion on about you. So to get that, to make that happen, the first thing you really need to do is start matching your skills to the job. And like I said before, you don't need to be the best candidate. You just need to be the best at distinguishing yourself. On Performative, you'll find, and when you go to this presentation, these are links within here. There is a grid that basically compares a CFO role to a controller role. But what it is, it's a nice summary of the different functions in finance. And so if you can use that as a way just to help assess your skills and think about where you're strongest, et cetera. And then also you want to make sure you think about what company fits you and why that is. And again, there's another tool out there that talks about how to evaluate the different type of companies and how that might fit with you. So again, you might fit to this company better than you realized, and you just want to be able to emphasize that because it helps set you apart from everybody else. And then you need to make sure that after you understand yourself, that you really study the company and its business drivers, the key risks, and its current position, because this is all relative in terms of you know what your skills are, now where to apply them. And in here, I use this primarily for networking, but I've also used it for every interview that I've gone on, where I just kind of jot down what are the big things in these 10 questions to understand a business. And the purpose of that is just to help clarify what you know about that company, but also when you get into the interview, you don't want to spend that time just discovering what the business does. You want to get in there and discuss what the business does. So there's a big difference between spending that interview time asking discovery questions, especially now when you can get much of it in advance. You want to show that you've done your homework, and then you can get in there and discuss the specifics. And again, this guide is just a way to kind of capture your thoughts, and you don't have to invest a lot of time there because most companies typically have a couple of business drivers that run the show, and you just want to see what are the key things that operate that business, and perhaps where are they doing well or not. And then again, as you understand the business, it's much easier for you to study the role and context of the company and what are the skills that they're going to be looking for day one. And again, this to me is the most critical element in your preparation, is to figure out where you stack up based on what the company needs. I mean, if you find out that the company is in a massive growth mode, and your background is a lot of heavy process, that really may not be as interesting to them as someone that has worked in a high growth, doing a lot of new business, et cetera. So you want to make sure that you match up to what they need. So we talk about moving into preparing your network. And this slide is what I call the march to the hiring manager. On the left side, it shows the level of influence that they would have with the hiring manager. And on the bottom, it's based upon the level of the relationship they have with that hiring manager. So you can see that we use this for networking, but yet before you go into your interview, the first people that you want to start working with or talking to are the people down in what I call in the influence area, or in this orange circle. These are people that are really inside the company today or have a very strong relationship with the hiring manager. If you have those people in your network or can get to them, they're going to give you the most relevant information about that company. Now you can go ahead and you can expand that to perhaps a former employee or a service provider. So best example there would be an auditor that works with the company. But again, as you look at that, I find them perhaps a little less effective just because they're not inside the company today and they have more of an outsider view. I mean, a former employee, good spot, but you always have to be cautious when you talk to them. Are they going to be the best source of information? So when you're working with your network, the things that you're really looking for is first to complete your picture of the company, and you're really trying to get a sense of what are the most significant issues facing the company today. Because again, if you go back to that hiring manager and you think about they want someone that can help them succeed, what are the issues that they're facing today that they need someone to help them with, right? And then as you go through that, you think, okay, how does that influence the role and this role that you're looking at? What are the types of things that you're going to be looking out of that for this role to achieve? Next is who are you going to interview? And again, I would say if you don't know who it's going to be, it's always a fair question to ask the HR person, who am I going to be talking to? And most times when I've asked, I've gotten it back just so I can get a sense of preparing. And so besides just going out and looking at their LinkedIn profile, I always like to figure out, if you don't know who they are, perhaps you should work with your network to figure out the likely individuals. But hopefully what you can get to with your network is someone that knows those people and can give you some feedback on them. I've gotten some great feedback on folks that would tell me, never say no to this person in your interview. Never say no. And when I walked in to interview him, he said, the first thing I want to tell you about myself is that if you say no to me, I'm going to get mad. So it was some great intel before I walked into the meeting. But those types of things I think are important because, again, people will hear things better if delivered in a style that they're accustomed to. And again, I don't want to make it sound like a parlor trick, but you've got a very limited window of time, and you're competing against everything else this person's got in their day to capture their attention in that short window. And so, the easier you can put it in their vernacular, if you talk to someone that's very operations-oriented, spending a lot of time dealing with your finance background, while relevant, may not be relevant to that person, or maybe not as important. So, stating your finance background in more of an operational sense and how you supported operations, that may click with them better. And then lastly with your network, if they can deliver your message in advance and your message really is the promise that you could bring into this role, that is great because the more often you can get inside the company and start having people share that message, the more important it is. So for the current role that I have, I knew several people at the company, or I knew several people that had connections at the company, and as I talked to them and they knew I was going to go in an interview, several of my folks in my network said, hey, I know Mark, this is what I think he can do. So when the first day I walked in the door, almost all the people I interviewed said, hey, yeah, I got a call from, a friend of yours, so-and-so, and talked about your background. And, it really made a big difference because I was the only one that interviewed that had that occur, that they actually had somebody talk to them in advance about me. So in a way, it just planted the seed about who I was, and it helped, me start achieving my interview even before I got there. Start achieve that goal, deliver what my promise is, etc. Now we move into what I consider the heart of the interview process, asking and answering questions. And I think when it comes to where you spend your time, I actually think these are of equal value. I think most people consider getting asked questions important, but I think the questions you ask really give that person across the table from you a real sense of, how you approach business, how you think, what's important, did you do your homework? So the types of questions that I like to ask when I'm in there is just anything I need to really clarify, specific things to understanding the company. And again, after I've done my homework and understand, going through and getting what I can from, public sites and my network. So these are typically, when I say clarify my understanding, it's generally things that are very specific points, and then in the role where, if something is, try and just get, again, very specific. And what I'm trying to do there, quite frankly, is understand things so whether I get to the point that I can understand if it matches up with my own skill set. I like to ask questions to the interviewer to kind of get their sense of the industry and the company issues, because that usually gives you a lot of great insight as you continue into the interview. And I always bring a copy of my questions that I would say probably 60% of the time, the people I've interviewed, I'll say I brought questions, and they say, oh, really? And I'm like, and I've got them right here, and they'll say, oh, what are they? And I'll pass them across the table. And again, it's a small act, but I think it has a strong impression that you've really done your work and that you're really thinking about what this, you're showing, quite frankly, a high level of interest. And, if you're hiring somebody, that's the type of person that you want to hire. Now, when it comes to answering questions, again, I always prepare these in advance. So based on all the work I've done before, where the company is, what do I think is the most, critical issue? How does that play into this role? I start to consider what are the questions that are most likely that I'm going to be asked. And again, thinking about, they're going to be looking towards what are the most relevant skills or cultural fit based on where they are. And so I usually will write out my answers in advance. And then the best way for me to fine-tune my answers and then also make it sound natural when I get there is I practice my answers aloud 6 times. And what's amazing to me is when I practice them aloud, I realize I write way more than I'd ever really say, because I start to read it aloud and I just think, oh my God, this is terrible. But as you do that, and after you go through it 4 or 5 times, you really start to hone down a really nice, crisp message. But also, when you get into that interview, you don't really even think about it anymore because you've practiced it. So it really gives you a boost to your self-confidence. And so, your ability to, when someone asks you a question, to turn it around and deliver a nice, clean answer without a lot of thinking about it makes a great impression. Also, I think in this prep, that even they might ask you a question that's perhaps a little bit different than the one you prepared for, it still really helps you get ready because, as you, again, going through that process of practicing aloud, you start to think through many alternatives to how you might want to answer it. So in many ways, it helps you prep for a broader set of questions than I guess I ever realized until after I went through several interviews. So again, I can't emphasize more than anything else, just standing there in your kitchen or somewhere, just saying your answers aloud is huge benefits when you get into that interview. There are some great books, that you can go select on Amazon that have lists of questions, so you don't have to come up with them on your own. And there's several that I've seen that have, it's based on the type of person you meet. So they break it down by whether you're talking to an executive or an HR or someone that's in the group, and so it gives you some really good starting spot. So now I'll pass it back to John for a quick polling question, and I'll go from there, John.
Great. Thank you so much. And great information so far. Thanks a lot for that insight, Mark. So as I mentioned earlier, for those that are here interested in getting CPE credit, you must answer all 3 of the polling questions. This is the first of 3. But even if you're not here, why don't you go ahead and take a moment to answer this question. It's probably a 5 seconds worth here. And what we'll do when we get into the Q&A segment is we'll turn these questions around, and we'll see what everyone says, and then we'll ask Mark what he thinks about what everyone said, and hopefully gain a little more insight into what we're talking about this morning. So I'll go ahead and leave this poll open for another 5 seconds or so. So if you want to get your vote in, go ahead and do that. And at this point, why don't I go ahead and close it down, and we'll pop to the next slide, and I'll hand it back over to Mark.
All right. Thanks, John. Okay, interviewing strategy. And to me, this is the interview strategy when you actually get in the room and start. The first thing I always do is, just as a housekeeping, and this is very similar to when you're running a networking meeting, is I always ask kind of what the time check is, because perhaps they say, well, they might schedule you for an hour, but you may only have 15 minutes. And so it's important to just know how much time you have. And then I usually ask how the interviewer would like to proceed, and at that point, that's when I usually reference that I've brought some questions, and so I'll let them decide, but also like to make sure that they know at that point in time that I'm ready to start. I've got some questions of my own that we can start with, and surprisingly, I would say that what I find is that when I mention that I have questions, I would bet it's got to be probably 50-50. That the interviewer turns it over to me and says, oh, okay, well, why don't we start with your questions then? Once I started doing that, I've been a little surprised. But when I go into my questions, I always begin kind of with my interviewer. I just say, hey, maybe you can give me a little bit of your background and a view of the industry and role. And again, that to me, the things that they feed back to me are really, one, oftentimes clarify things that I was going to ask questions about, so it takes a question off my list, but then also gives me a sense of what's important to that person. Because, again, the first thing that they're going to respond to, it's almost like taking a test. Your first response is the best response. So same thing here. The first response that they give me, I usually find is the most important to them because it's the most relevant thing on their mind, because it's what's facing, it's the issue that they're trying to solve, it's the thing that they need help with. So that to me is when you start your questions, I always have this series of just 1 or 2 on the interviewer and their background. Now, when it comes to giving your answers, my philosophy is you want to be complete but short, okay? Think of each answer still almost like an advertisement, where the idea is give them enough to go on, but don't give them more than that. And if they want more detail, they're going to request it. So again, don't go really long, because after you go, quite frankly, more than, unless they've asked you to give an example about something, your answer shouldn't be more than, probably 30, 40 seconds long at tops, right? Anything beyond that, I think that people start to get lost because they can't, tough for them to recall back to where you started, because again, remember, you're competing against so many other things going on in their day. So start off short. If they want more, they'll ask for more. And believe me, if you practice that, I think you'll find that you give people a good answer, they'll ask for more. Now, when you give experience examples, the one thing I will say is it's always worthwhile to make sure that you give, unless it's self-evident, 1 or 2 sentences to set the context of it. So, because sometimes it's a little lost if you just talk about your skills, unless the context of the situation is apparent. So, for example, if you are talking about a skill that was in, came after, a major crisis in the market or something like that, or, a major downturn in your business, or a introduction of a big regulatory change, that changes that interviewer's view of that skill or experience you're talking about dramatically, because it sets it really sets the table for, what the environment was. Because sometimes, the same skill in that environment may be, 10, 20 times harder to accomplish. So it gives a greater appreciation than if you don't set that context for them. And then lastly, I always say, kind of, quite frankly, save the idle chit-chat to the end of the interview. I know a lot of people like to go in and, they see a Wisconsin Badger thing on the wall and they talk about that or something, in their college. And for me, an interview is still business, and it's not that I don't want to be personal with the person, but I need to make sure I accomplish what I need to do first, and then, and then I can, when I do get to the end of the interview, and if I've got time, quite frankly, I try and focus all the chat on the interviewer, not on myself. But again, it's not that not that I don't want to be personable, but you don't want to use that valuable time for me on things that, quite frankly, won't have any relevance to their making decisions about you. Let's move into what I call the strong finish. And when I say dating and job search, there's one thing that doesn't work in this dating and job search is desperation. And so for anyone on the phone that's in transition, a friend of mine, Marcia Ballinger, is a recruiter, and she's been, for Keystone Search, and she's taken a very unique approach, in that for their company always sits in the interviews. So they will sit in for 5 years, she's probably sat in, several thousand interviews. And during that, what she's noticed is that there has been a difference in how the employed candidate and the in-transition candidate behaves. And quite frankly, the in-transition candidate's behaviors work against themselves. And when she and I first met once for coffee and she was explaining this to me, I just thought to myself, oh my God, I have been so guilty of these. And I think what she generally, again, the post gives more background, but the key things are that I think we tend to make the judgments too early that the role is a really good fit for us before we really know all the facts. We tend to be a little more over-aggressive in our body language. We'll lean forward. We'll be, kind of a little bit more, just aggressive in our style. And then, quite honestly, tend to be more focused on our own points because we just, we really obviously want to get out of transition and get back into a job. And so I think, you're trying to be you want to try and give as much as you can, and just, it seems like you're just streaming out data. And for her, the employed candidate on the alternative tends to be more thoughtful. They have to be more convinced, and therefore it becomes more of a discussion about the business than kind of this force feeding of data. So it's hard to, when I first wrote this and read it, it was hard for me to read just because I could see myself and all the mistakes I made. But in hindsight, I think it's amazing. And so, if you can avoid this, it's great, because what she's told me is that, in her experience, probably, 60 to 70% of the in-transition candidates have taken themselves out of the running for the role just simply because of the way that they behaved during the interview. So really good feedback here. The other thing that might be useful is for someone that, if you haven't been working for a while, it's obviously the dreaded question, how long have you been out of work? And this will give you a way to try and help answer that question, because, in terms of what were really the opportunity employments for your role that you're looking for, et cetera, et cetera. So again, something else to read if you're in transition. And having gone through being in transition and looking for work, again, kind of work written from a very personal perspective here. So when you get to the end of the interview, always watch with someone when there's signs that they're done. They grab their iPhone, they shut their notebook, they, whatever. I mean, you're going to see it. And the key at this point is just to close it down, because anything that you say after this point, in my opinion, is basically lost. And, the desire is to kind of rush to kind of add a few more comments, but, I would just encourage you not to. And so what you really want to do at this point is really turn the control of the interview back over to them. It's that, now they've obviously signaled they're finished, and so you don't want to do anything other than just let them, guide the rest of it the way out. Now, when it comes to clarifying items that went wrong, my recommendation is you wait to your follow-up note. I mean, again, the desire is to fix it at that moment, but what I think that there's a big benefit in time to reflect on, was it really a big issue or not, and also to help you come up with an adequate answer. The only time I would try to qualify things or correct things inside an interview is when I feel like they've misjudged my experience. That's the only time I'll try and make a clarification, because I don't want to come across argumentative, but if that's, you can make that minor correction if needed. But other than that, things just don't always go 100%. But instead of kind of debating, end the meeting and try and clarify, and so it looks like you're, typically you lose your way, I think. And having first-hand experience, I know you do. So I would generally wait to the end and then just fix it in a note when you send your thank you to them. And then when it comes to saying thank you, I like to try and add a little more depth when I send it to someone. So again, trying to provide something else that sets me apart, when instead of just saying thanks for the time, blah, blah, blah. I usually like to try and, if there's a, if there's a business issue that I brought up, I'll send a link to that. So if I reference something that happened in their industry, I'll send that link in. If we talk about something very specific, I'll send in a link to, an example of a work item that I discussed, just so they could see it. Or again, this is where the personal connection comes in. If there's something that they talked about when you're at the end of your interview, you can send them an article related to their school or their background or whatever. But I think, it doesn't, again, you don't want to make your note too long, but, these are things you can just tuck in there at the end that, again, help set you apart, that, you're more, you're giving it some good thought, and you're, providing something back to them of interest. And, what's interesting is that for me, after I started doing this, I got a lot of great comments back from folks saying, oh, I thought that was really interesting. Or I shared a work example with someone, and they called back and said, hey, would you be interested to come in and talk to some other people about this work? We think it's really interesting. So that was kind of fascinating. That through the interview, I actually got back in and got to meet with some other folks after the fact. But again, it's just another thing that really kind of set me apart from the rest of the group. And actually, with that work example, that was one of the things from my current job that came into play. Was I gave them something that they had been kind of struggling with, and to see that I had already done it made a big difference. And then, ultimately, in all these things, where you want to land is really in the upper right box, where I think it's a combination of a really good interview result is a combination of your level of understanding of yourself, the company, and the role. And because in that, on the upper left here, the arrow up here, you are you're moving from discovery to discussion. It becomes a lot more in-depth. I mean, and you understand where you fit the best, right? And then as far as confidence goes, it's your ability to deliver that understanding in very simple statements. And again, that's why I think practicing aloud just pays rich dividends. So I always say you're discussing not the so what, you discuss the so what instead of the what. The what of the company is the issue. The so what is how you solve that issue. Your self-confidence, when you interview someone and they don't have any confidence, it's like buying from, if you go to a salesperson and they don't seem to have, they don't have any confidence in the product, you're kind of hard-pressed to really buy from them. And so you're your number one salesperson. So the more you can do to get yourself confidence, again, that's where the practice and the preparation really comes into play. But that confidence in your answer makes a big difference. And then lastly, the fact that your message is clear. Again, getting that promise across is important because you're trying, as you do that research, trying to understand what is the issue that hiring manager is solving and how you give that promise and you can solve that. And then also, because you've got a good background, you can grow from there. So with that, I just want to say thank you for your time today. I hope this was useful. But again, I think some of the other links on there, there are other, if you just Google, or just, sorry, if you search in Performative, you'll find on interview there are lots of other folks that have done blogs on interviewing, et cetera. So there is a rich amount of data out there on Performative that you can use. So John, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thanks so much. That was just awesome insights. Now we have 2 more polling questions to ask, and I'm going to launch the first one right now. And I'll give about 45 seconds for each of these. And to remind you, Mark clearly knows what he's talking about here, and we've got an opportunity to take a few minutes and ask him some more questions. So if you've got anything you'd like to hear about, please let's go ahead and ask your question. We'll do our best to get to them here this morning. And once again, quick note, if you're here for CPE credits, we need you to answer this question. But even if you're not, go ahead and take a few seconds to give your answer, as we'd like to see what you have to say. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this one down, and then we'll quickly go to the third and final polling question. And just launching that. There we go. And give that a quick answer, and then we'll turn these around and ask Mark what he thinks about them. One final reminder also, we've got a quick survey after this event. And if you would please stay on for the 60 seconds after we shut things down, and you'll be prompted to take that survey. In that survey, we make it very easy, just the click of a mouse actually, to connect with Mark if you would like to do so. Please feel free, and we're happy to help make that connection. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this one down, and let's, as promised, take a quick look at the results so we can all see what our peers were saying relative to what we said. So first question was, what is the first thing you want to deliver to the interviewer? And the responses here are explanation of your resume, your promise, and key skills from last job. Mark, what's your take on this?
Well, I think, the fact that people are thinking about your promise, I think that's, it really sets the stage for everything else that, lays out what you're going to do for the company, and then, the skills and your experience really back it up. So I think, that, to me, it really helps connect to what that hiring manager is looking for. When you give that, but again, and it also sets you, it's the first thing that helps set you apart from everybody else, is your skills, and your skills are going to be somewhat similar. And so it's, again, how you've used that skills that matters. And so I think finding that, helping craft that message is I think, really important, and that's kind of what the promise is.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I find when I'm interviewing folks and they immediately jump into a review of their resume, I feel like we've missed the whole why are we here and why am I talking to you piece, and then they're kind of into this rote thing where they now feel like they have to say something meaningful about all of their job experience. And that seems to miss a good bit of the point of the interview.
Well, and what I told you too, John, is that if you think about a company, right, and you're going to go make a product, the first thing you think about is what's the need that you're trying to fulfill, and then what's the product that you make to match that need. So it's actually very, the approach here is very similar. And, you'll see a lot of it in the networking. We talk about that, you want to try and take all the behavior somewhat of a salesperson when you're out and, or a rainmaker when you're in networking. And again, you're trying to show people what's the need that you can fill. And here, you're much more specific because obviously you're interviewing for a very specific role. So I think it follows along that same behavior that we do, when people come up with products.
Right. Gotcha. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put the second question out there, which clearly was a slam dunk. So why does practicing your questions and answers matter, and all of the above, for sure. Now, it's interesting, Mark. It seems pretty obvious. I don't think I've ever heard anyone actually mention it, though. Why is it that this is one of those things that just people don't talk about or don't think about when it comes to interview preparation?
Well, I'll tell you, John, I didn't really think about it until it's like practicing to give a speech, right? And so the first time I ever gave a speech, I don't necessarily, I wrote it up, but then when I got to talk, it just seemed like I went so long, and it was horrible, I'm sure, for the people that were the attendees. So again, once I realized that as I spoke more, that the more I practiced, the better message I delivered. So, I just realized one day after going into an interview and really, I think, turning it sideways where I just went way too long and I felt like I just wasn't so clear, that I just needed to apply the same discipline. But, again, what I found was the benefit was much greater because I got myself actually ready for more questions than I thought, because as you deal with that thing, how do I answer it, that I actually came up with maybe a lot more answers than just a specific question. So,
right. And I really want to emphasize this: hearing yourself answer questions helps you edit out unnecessary fluff. It is an interesting thing how much unnecessary fluff I think people just naturally put in almost as a time filler, or to maybe help them get to the next thought. And it's much preferable to have nice, concise answers that are really clear, brief, and to the point. Finally, how long do you spend in total preparing for an interview opportunity? Is there a right answer to this question, Mark?
No, I think I think, to me, I would invest your time based upon how well you think you match up to that role. There are roles that I've gone into because I had a strong network connection, but perhaps my background wasn't a 100% match. So I had to look at it from a perspective of how likely I could get in, a probability. So it's a little bit like, do you fold, draw, or push all in a little bit. And so I think for a position that you really have a good fit, a lot of strong background, a lot about the business. I mean, investing a lot of time, I think, will pay off because even though you know it, that prep I think is really good. I think when you get underneath 2 hours, I think more likely it'll be harder for you to perform well, just because I think by the time you write out your answers and you practice them aloud and think about what the role is, there's probably about 2 hours on the inside to get yourself ready, in my opinion. But again, you do gain efficiencies in time. So I think it doesn't have to be 5-6 hours every time, because if you're interviewing for similar roles, you're going to be able to reuse some of the questions, so you don't have to start over from scratch every time. So,
right.
I usually build off the same one. So, again, I don't think there's a wrong answer. I think again, I would make it that spend the time based upon how likely you'll think you'll get the role. So because chances are, if you're interviewing, you're probably interviewing for more than just one. So, just a kind of a time investment.
Gotcha. Great. All right, let's go ahead and get to the questions here. So you mentioned earlier some books from Amazon that are good interview question prep books. You wouldn't happen to know any of those, are you, off the top of your head? You'd care to shout out to the audience?
I don't remember the ones that did, but I think one is just called I think it's called Questions to Ask in Your Interview. I think is the actual question, is the actual name of the title. Actually, I thought about it last night. I apologize I don't have it this morning. But I'll tell you what, John, when we repost it, I'll find the links and put them in we can put them in the
Oh, that'd be great.
in the system, so I'll do that. But again, I went in and the way I found it initially was actually, I quite frankly came across it by just typing in interview questions, and then there's a book that I saw, Questions to Ask in Your Interview, and that's how I discovered it the first time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next question. Is it okay to ask if there are any gaps between the interview discussion and the interviewer's expectations? And this actually, I'd like to pull back for half a second before you address that. This question sounds to me like, is it okay to, go for or at least towards the close? Did I meet your expectations? Did I answer the questions that that you had coming in about my skills? Are there any areas where you think I might not meet the requirements of the position? Those I consider to all be sort of closing questions. They're helping you understand if there's a gap between what the interviewer wants to get from a successful candidate and what you have delivered. And I think frequently interviewers know they're being closed, which isn't, I think, a bad thing in most cases. But what's your recommendation around closing type questions?
Again, I think at the close, if you have a sense of how much time you've got, right, and as you get farther into the interview, it's always worth just doing a spot check to asking during the during the interview. Is there anything specific that you want to make sure that I cover? Is there anything else in more depth that you want? It's always good to just ask that kind of that grounding question. The way I think it's important when you position this question to make it so they don't have to say no. Okay, people don't like to say no, and you don't want to put them into that position to have to say no. So just say, if you say to them, "Oh, did I meet all your expectations?" It puts them in a tough spot, right? So you want to be. I think it's a good question, but I think if you position it more as clarifying whether or not there's additional information that you want, I think is probably it's a softer way to do it without making that interviewer feel uncomfortable. Because again, it's almost like asking. I've had people ask me right at the end of the interview, "So do I get the job?" and you never want to put someone in that spot that they have to say no. So I think they're great. I think that they're great questions. I think they can be closing questions, but in a way that is done more as it makes it look as though you're seeking clarification, even though you are, quite frankly, trying to put the close on a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next question. What if you get a question that you don't have a good answer to, but you feel like you should? What do you do? Do you dance? Do you redirect? Do you just say, next? I mean, not literally, but how do you handle those?
What I've done is I'd say, you know what, can we go to the next one and let me think about that while we're talking through the next one? And I've been straight up and said, I haven't thought about it from that person. I haven't thought about my skills in that background, in that light. So can I think about it for a second until we move on? And most times people have responded positively and said, okay. And again, I position it as though, you've taken it. I think the way I've posed it is that I said that's an interesting way to look at the skills. I haven't thought about it that way. So can I think about that for a second? So can we keep going and we come back to it? And that has helped me. It effectively buys me a little more time. But it's also generally true that they, again, you don't have the interviewer's same set of experience or skills or background. And I find that oftentimes the people I get those from are from, like the executive manager team or the HR or someone in operations that is not a finance person.
Mm-hmm.
So their view of the skills are a little different. So so I think oftentimes it's not that you haven't thought of the answer, but it is they're just taking a little different tact on it. So that's the way I've gotten out of it, is just taking responsibility. Gotcha. Let me think about it and come back to it.
Gotcha. This next question, this absolutely drives me crazy. You walk into an interview, and I'm just going to set the stage here. It's just after lunchtime, 1 in the afternoon, 1:30, and you can tell within 60 seconds that the person across the desk from you is like on their way to a post-lunch coma. And you know that's basically they won't remember what they asked of you, or certainly your responses. Do you have any suggestions for how you turn that scenario into something that could be successful?
Generally a little humor helps. I mean, again, I know it sounds like a parlor trick, but it's really true that's where if someone is really dead on their feet when you walk in the door, maybe turning on their background so they kind of show interest in them. And, that's where I would change a little bit of the idle chit-chat up front, so you kind of wake them up, because obviously they're not in the mood to kind of do business at that point.
Right.
So I think if you find that, the other thing I would say is that if that person is kind of tired or in a post-lunch coma, really limit how much detail you give to somebody, and focus more on real-life examples, things that are going to be more tangible to them, things that are going to connect with them, that they'll more likely connect with, because it's not a generic skill. It's more about it's like telling them a story about something versus listing off your skill set. So I would lighten up the detail dramatically and use more examples that kind of infer your skill versus being very specific about the skill.
Gotcha. Great. Okay, and with that, we're actually coming up to the end of our hour. In order to keep everyone on time, I'd like to go ahead and start winding down. We do have a couple of items here. So just a final reminder, short survey coming your way as soon as we shut this down. We really appreciate you giving us the 60 seconds. We're happy to connect you with Mark Richards. If you go ahead and click on that box, we'll make that connection, and that's available in the survey. Of course, please join us at performative.com to ask any additional questions. Plus, there have been a lot of conversations in the community on performative, as Mark mentioned earlier, around these topics. And these are topics that are timeless. They never get old. It's always great to get perspective from your peers, and that is available at Performative Plus. In fact, Mark spends a fair amount of time on Performative himself, for which we thank him. And if you have further questions, it's a great place to ask him. If you have any questions about CPE credit, please contact Chris Brower. You can see her email address right there at the bottom of the slide. She's very quick. Typically, we get the PDF certificates out within 24 hours. But if you forgot to pre-register for our pre-request CPE credit, just reach out to her and she'll get you taken care of there. Finally, thanks, of course, to Mark. Great information, great insights. It's clearly really thought about this. Mark's website, candidateschair.com, is a fantastic resource. And Mark, thanks so much for giving us your time and attention this morning. We appreciate it.
Yeah, so thanks, John. Thanks, everybody, for attending as well. And I hope this, again, take everything as a starter spot to start work, starter ideas to work from. And good luck if you're interviewing the next couple weeks.
Beautiful. And that's it. Everyone have a wonderful Friday and a great holiday next week. And I hope to see you back either at another event or at performative.com in the future. Take care, everyone.